Alright, so before we begin, we must first go over what belonging is. Belonging is a sense of connection to a person, place, thing, group, or idea, which gives a feeling of acceptance and identity. Much like how Australia belongs to the Commonwealth, and like how Harry Potter belongs to Hogwarts. Of course, while there is belonging, there is also not belonging. Not belonging is a sense that there is a lack of connection to a person, place, thing, group, or idea, which gives a feeling of exclusion and difference. Much like a tomato, which appears to be a vegetable, is actually a fruit. To delve further into belonging as a concept, we have to investigate different types of belonging and its context. To do this, we can look at different types of belonging, such as personal, historical, cultural, or social belonging, as well as connections with things, such as with people, place, groups, or communities. Using these things, we can move on to look at belonging in texts. The first of which is the spoken word poem Rigged Game by Dylan Garrity.
I know I am lucky enough to be one of the winners of this game. I was handed a head start and a rulebook in my own tongue, but the winners of a rigged game should not get to write the rules.
We will also be analysing the text Fishing with My Stepson, a poem by Robert Adamson. The final buck underwater dash of a school of jewfish, its explosion in the air, and for that split second of communion between us, utter wonder. We will begin by understanding aspects of belonging in relation to the text, and at this point feel free to pause the video to read the full analysis. In Rigged Game, we can see that the composer and the composer's sister are trying to fight for the rights of children who are disadvantaged, particularly by the 2001 No Child Left Behind policy, a North American educational bill which ended up forcing South American immigrants and their children to abandon their culture and their language. When looking at Fishing with My Stepson, we can see that there's a connection between two people, the stepfather and the stepson, through a mutual hobby, which is fishing at local fishing stops. This means that there is a familial connection and a fishing connection, which also means that there's a connection between the air, land, and ocean, and the animals and humans. Moving on, we can begin to look at the similarities between the two texts. The first of which is the use of personal pronouns such as I, my, we, our, or you, which relates to personal belonging.
This year for my sister's birthday, I got books for her students.
We wake by your watch on my wrist. Both texts also have a main theme revolving around belonging to a place.
My sister tells me school is the most stable place in these kids' lives. Since when does being a teacher mean having your hands tied while the schoolhouse burns to the ground?
In perfect dawn, we set out from dawn's boats. The outboard plows us through the bay. And finally, both texts use similes and metaphors to further expand on the composer's view.
Learning to read in a new language before you can even read in your own is like learning to walk while a pit bull is chasing you.
A graceful cast sails out as fine as a spiderweb. Its piercing silicon chip alarm bats squealing. And of course, we have to look at the differences between the two texts. The most obvious of which is the fact that one is about negative belonging and the other about positive belonging.
These kids are good organs in a sick body. Their heritage is a banned book.
And for that split second of communion between us, utter wonder. We can also examine the differences between the relationships between the subject and the composer. In Rigged Game, the composer is not directly affected by the subject. Rather, he is talking about others who do not belong in a society. Whereas, with Fishing with My Stepson, the composer is directly affected by the subject. He is talking about fishing with his son and how fishing brings them together. Finally, there is a difference between the use of language to convey meaning. For example, in Rigged Game, this is through emotive language.
We are telling these children who have spent their whole lives in the deep end that they'll learn how to swim if they just float out a little farther.
Whereas in Fishing with My Stepson, this is through descriptive language. We drink Coke from a plastic esky, with ice melting into newspaper-wrapped squid, the only unfrozen bait in town. Knowing this, we can move on to what we have learned about belonging from these texts, which brings us back to belonging as a concept. We can begin to explore questions relating to belonging and explore questions relating to the effects of belonging or not belonging, such as where do I belong and the specific places, and what are the consequences of not belonging. We can also start to compare and contrast and ask things like why does one person belong while another does not, and specific things such as why some stepfamilies can get along and belong with each other while others cannot. We can also examine instances of belonging and not belonging throughout history and in current affairs, such as racism, i.e. the Little Rock Nine, or Indigenous landowners like the Aboriginal people of Australia or the Native Americans. Finally, there's also the ways belonging can be created or lost, such as politically, like the No Child Left Behind policy, or through hobbies like fishing. You should now have a better understanding of belonging, especially through the analysis of the two texts and the concepts that they bring up. This video should be applicable to any other text revolving around belonging so that you can investigate for yourself and come up with your own analysis and understanding.